John D. Rockefeller. When you hear that name, you probably think, well, immense wealth, right? Oil, power, maybe even that famous Stern portrait.
Definitely. Images of the Gilded Age Titan.
But we're going to dig a bit deeper today. Beyond just the money, we're looking at maybe his core strength, this incredible ability he had to adapt.
Yeah, that's the angle. Because his life spanned massive changes, didn't it? In business, in society.
Totally. And we're seeing this adaptability play out across, what, 7 distinct stages of his career and life? He was constantly adjusting, absorbing new information, changing strategy.
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're drawing on historical accounts, various analyses, to really unpack how his adaptability drove his success.
Not just a standard biography.
No. We want to see how he evolved, sometimes quite radically, to navigate obstacles and grab opportunities.
And crucially, what lessons are in it for you listening right now? How can understanding Rockefeller's adaptability help us today?
That's the goal. Because these principles, they aren't just about 19th century oil. They're about navigating change, finding resilience, seizing opportunities in pretty much any field.
Right. So whether you're in business, figuring out your career, or just trying to make sense of this, well, constantly changing world, there are some surprisingly relevant takeaways here.
Absolutely. So we'll break down these 7 phases, look at the signs of adaptation, what benefits came from it, and the practical lessons.
Okay, let's start at the very beginning. His early years, and this may be surprising, focus on thrift and discipline.
Yeah, it's fascinating how those early experiences really shaped him. His family situation was a bit unstable. His father's income wasn't always reliable. So young John had to step up financially pretty early on.
So that's adaptability right there, contributing financially as a kid.
I think so. It wasn't just about earning money. It was about developing responsibility, learning to manage resources carefully. That stayed with him his whole life.
Okay, so adapting to family circumstances. What else? We hear about his self-control, right? Almost stoic.
Yeah, that focus. Some saw it as detachment, maybe, but it let him stay laser focused on his goals. And then there's the bookkeeping.
Ah, yes, Ledger A.
From his very first job, meticulously tracking every penny. That's pretty remarkable discipline for a teenager.
So what were the payoffs for these early adaptations?
Well, huge. First, an incredible work ethic and financial discipline right from the get-go. Second, that detailed record keeping, especially understanding costs like transportation, which others often ignored, that became invaluable later.
Well, how?
Because when he got into oil, knowing those transport costs inside out gave him a massive edge. And fundamentally, all that thrift, that systematic saving, provided the actual cash for his first business venture.
Okay, so lessons for you listening, especially if you're starting something.
First, yeah, that financial discipline, knowing your costs, it's not just for big companies. It's critical from day one.
And maybe don't write off tough beginnings.
Exactly. Adversity can actually forge those adaptable traits you'll need. It builds resilience.
And third,
Systematic processes, even simple things like good bookkeeping, they create a really solid foundation to build on.
right. Okay, so that sets the stage. Now let's talk about his big pivot, getting into the oil game.
Yeah, this is a key moment. Oil is discovered in Pennsylvania, 1859. Big boom starting.
And Rockefeller wasn't in oil initially, was he? He was doing well elsewhere.
Exactly. He had a successful commodities business already. Grain, meat, basic goods. Doing quite well. But he saw the sheer potential in this brand new oil industry.
So adaptability sign number 1. Willing to pivot from something already successful, that takes guts.
It really does. And then the way he entered oil is also crucial. He didn't jump into drilling, which was super speculative, very boom and bust.
No, he went for refining. Why?
And he saw it as the more stable part of the business, turning crude oil into usable products like kerosene. More predictable, more controllable in his view.
Smart, less risky.
Yeah.
And they didn't go it alone either.
Right. No, that's another sign of adaptation. He was willing to form partnerships, pool resources and expertise to get into this new field and grow. That led to Standard Oil.
So the benefits seem clear. Entering a booming market, choosing a more stable segment.
Which positioned him for huge growth, but with, let's say, managed risk compared to the wildcatters drilling wells. And those partnerships were absolutely essential for pooling capital and know-how.
Okay, takeaways for entrepreneurs today.
Well, keep your eyes peeled for emerging opportunities, obviously, and be ready to pivot, even if you're comfortable now.
Don't get complacent.
Right. And think about the value chain. Maybe the most glamorous part isn't the most stable or profitable. Look at refining versus drilling.
Good point. And leverage partnerships.
Absolutely. Strategic partnerships can be critical, especially for entering new markets or scaling up fast. You can't always do it all yourself.
Okay, so he's in refining, Standard Oil is forming. Now let's look at how they operated. This focus on efficiency and waste reduction.
Yes, this became a hallmark. It wasn't just about cutting costs, it was about finding value where others saw nothing. Like, what do you do with the byproducts of refining?
What did they do? Most people just dumped it, right?
Pretty much. But Rockefeller's team, they were adaptable. They figured out uses for gasoline, which was initially a nuisance for tar, petroleum jelly, lubricants. They turned waste into revenue streams.
That's brilliant, actually, finding hidden value.
And it went further. Integration. Why rely on outside plumbers for your pipelines when you can hire your own? More control, probably cheaper in the long run.
Okay, vertical integration starting early.
And even buying timberland to make their own barrels. Controlling the supply of essential components. It was all about efficiency and self-sufficiency.
So the benefits. Lower costs, obviously.
Significantly lower than competitors, plus new revenue from those waste products and much greater control over their whole operation, less dependence on suppliers who could raise prices or be unreliable.
Lessons for you listening.
Relentlessly chase efficiency. Look everywhere, even in your trash pile, metaphorically speaking.
Right. Could there be value there?
Could be. Also, consider vertical integration for key inputs or services if it makes sense. Does it give you a cost or control advantage?
And innovation isn't just about shiny new tech.
Exactly. Sometimes it's about optimizing processes, doing the basic stuff way better than anyone else. That was their innovation in many ways.
Okay, this efficiency drive sets them up. But then comes the more aggressive phase, the Cleveland conquest.
Right. This is where Rockefeller really starts consolidating the industry, and his adaptability shows up in his tactics.
Oh, so?
He developed a very systematic plan to buy out or merge with the other refiners in Cleveland, which was the refining hub. It wasn't random, it was orchestrated.
A systematic approach.
Yeah.
And the tactics themselves were adaptable.
Yeah, varied. Sometimes he'd just open his books and show competitors how much stronger Standard Oil was, basically saying, join us or face the inevitable.
Wow. Okay, financial transparency as a weapon.
Sometimes. Other times it was more like veiled threats, suggesting they'd be driven to bankruptcy if they didn't sell. And then there were the railroad deals.
Ah, the South Improvement Company. That sounds controversial.
Deeply controversial then and now. It was a short-lived scheme, but basically it gave Standard Oil secret rebates on shipping, making it much cheaper for them to ship oil than their competitors.
Putting competitors at a huge disadvantage. Talk about adapting the competitive landscape to your favor.
Undeniably. Ethically dubious to many, but strategically effective in the short term. It showed his willingness to use leverage wherever he could find it.
So the benefits were pretty stark for Standard Oil.
Absolutely. The Cleveland Massacre, as it was called. Within a few months, they controlled almost all the refining capacity in Cleveland. Massive market share grab. Eliminated or absorbed key competitors.
And those railroad deals gave them huge leverage.
Huge leverage and a significant cost advantage.
So, lessons for today, navigating competition. Obviously, the ethical landscape is different, but the principles.
Well, first, deeply understand your competitive environment. Know who you're up against and adapt your strategy. Second, leverage your strengths. Use whatever tools are available legally and ethically, of course, to achieve your goals.
And the core idea of using scale and efficiency against competitors who can't adapt as quickly.
That principle still holds. Being more efficient, more integrated, faster to adapt, that can be a powerful competitive weapon. But yeah, the specific tactics need careful consideration today.
Right. This dominance, though, it must have attracted pushback.
Oh, absolutely. From competitors, from the public, and especially from the railroads.
The railroads, were they benefiting from Standard Oil's business?
Initially, yes. But as Standard Oil got bigger, they could dictate terms. The railroads started feeling squeezed. This forced another adaptation from Rockefeller.
Which was?
Pipelines. Standard Oil invested heavily in building and buying pipelines to transport crude oil and refined products, a direct challenge to the railroads' control over transportation.
So, adapting by building alternative infrastructure when a key partner becomes adversarial.
Precisely. It reduced their dependence and gave them way more control over distribution costs and reliability. A massive strategic shift.
And they face legal challenges too, right? Regulatory scrutiny.
Constantly. In numerous state-level lawsuits, investigations, accusations of monopoly practices, they had to become very adaptable legally and strategically just to navigate all that. Hiring lawyers, adjusting corporate structures.
So the benefits of adapting here were survival, basically.
Survival and continued dominance. Investing in pipelines secured their logistics. They successfully fought off or navigated around railroad opposition. And they managed to weather those early legal storms, even though they foreshadowed the big antitrust case later.
Okay, lessons from this phase for you listening.
Be prepared to build or find alternatives if key partners turn into obstacles. Don't be overly reliant on any single supplier or channel if you can help it.
And expect scrutiny if you get big.
Yeah, market dominance often brings regulatory attention. You need to be prepared to adapt to that legal and political reality. Have good counsel, understand the rules.
And sometimes you need to play hardball to defend your position.
Within limits, yes. Defending your market share against powerful established players might require strong tactics. Again, always considering the legal and ethical lines.
Okay, so after all this intense building and battling, Rockefeller eventually starts to step back, transitioning.
Yes, towards the late 1890s, he begins pulling back from day-to-day management, thinking about retirement. That transition itself is an adaptation, right? Changing his own role.
And adapting his public image, too. He wasn't exactly popular.
No, he was widely criticized, seen as ruthless, so he adapted his PR strategy. He'd mostly avoided the public eye, that act of silence idea.
Right.
But later, he started engaging more, even published his memoirs, trying to shape his narrative.
And then came the really big shift. Philanthropy.
Huge. Establishing these large-scale, very organized foundations. University of Chicago, Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. This wasn't just charity, it was strategic philanthropy, applying business principles to giving.
Focused on specific areas. Medicine, education, science.
Yes. Very systematic. A major adaptation of how he used his vast wealth in his later years.
And the benefits. He managed to hand over the business.
Successfully transitioned leadership. He tried to improve his public image, mixed success there, maybe, but it was an effort.
And the philanthropy.
Created an immense, lasting legacy. He really set the template for modern, large-scale, strategic foundations. That impact is undeniable.
So lessons for the long haul. For you.
Plan for succession. Think about how you'll eventually transition out of your leadership role. It's an adaptation we all face eventually.
Address public perception proactively.
If it's negative, yes, you need an adaptable communication strategy. Ignoring it often doesn't work.
And think about legacy beyond just business.
Absolutely. Later stage wealth can be adapted for major societal impact, building a different kind of legacy.
Now, interestingly, that adaptability didn't stop with Rockefeller himself. The institutions he created, like the Rockefeller Foundation, they continued to adapt too.
Oh, definitely. That's a crucial part of the story. They weren't static. Take their work in Black education. Initially, they worked within the segregated systems of the time.
Which was the reality then, unfortunately.
Yes. But over time, especially as the civil rights movement gained momentum and societal understanding evolved, the foundation adapted. They started moving towards supporting initiatives focused on more genuine equal opportunity. That required internal reflection and change.
So adapting to changing social norms and needs. Were there other examples?
Sure. They also realized some early approaches, like focusing grants mainly on the so-called exceptional student, had limitations. It wasn't necessarily driving broad systemic change.
So they adapted their grant-making strategy.
They began to look at more systemic issues, broader interventions,
Wow.
and later, responding to shifts in politics and society, they broadened their focus again, moving from primarily education towards tackling economic opportunity more directly. They saw the issues were interconnected.
So the organization itself learned and evolved.
Exactly. This capacity for self-critique, for strategic redirection when things weren't working as hoped, or when the external context changed dramatically, that's organizational adaptability. It kept them relevant.
Okay, final set of lessons then.
Yeah.
For anyone building something lasting, an organization, or even a long-term project.
Your strategies can't be set in stone. The world changes. You have to adapt to stay effective.
Continuously evaluate.
Yes. Are your actions having the impact you intend? Be honest. And be willing to pivot if the answer is no, or if the context shifts.
And listen to feedback, even criticism.
Especially criticism sometimes. Both internal and external feedback is vital for knowing when and how to make those strategic adjustments. Don't operate in a vacuum.
So, wrapping it all up, Rockefeller's entire journey, really from boyhood thrift to the evolution of his foundations, decades after his peak business career.
It's just this continuous thread of adaptability. That relentless capacity to change, learn, respond to challenges, seize opportunities, it seems to be the bedrock of his incredible success and, well, his enduring complex legacy.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listener. Thinking about Rockefeller's story, all these phases of adaptation, where in your own life, your work, your projects, could injecting a bit more adaptability lead to a breakthrough?
Or maybe think about that principle of continuous evaluation and strategic redirection, like the foundation showed. How could you apply that more actively to your own goals or maybe your organization? Something to mull over.
Definitely. We encourage you to maybe read more about Rockefeller or think about other figures in history or business known for adapting to change. There's always more to explore.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening. John D. Rockefeller. When you hear that name, you probably think, well, immense wealth, right? Oil, power, maybe even that famous Stern portrait.
Definitely. Images of the Gilded Age Titan.
But we're going to dig a bit deeper today. Beyond just the money, we're looking at maybe his core strength, this incredible ability he had to adapt.
Yeah, that's the angle. Because his life spanned massive changes, didn't it? In business, in society.
Totally. And we're seeing this adaptability play out across, what, 7 distinct stages of his career and life? He was constantly adjusting, absorbing new information, changing strategy.
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're drawing on historical accounts, various analyses, to really unpack how his adaptability drove his success.
Not just a standard biography.
No. We want to see how he evolved, sometimes quite radically, to navigate obstacles and grab opportunities.
And crucially, what lessons are in it for you listening right now? How can understanding Rockefeller's adaptability help us today?
That's the goal. Because these principles, they aren't just about 19th century oil. They're about navigating change, finding resilience, seizing opportunities in pretty much any field.
Right. So whether you're in business, figuring out your career, or just trying to make sense of this, well, constantly changing world, there are some surprisingly relevant takeaways here.
Absolutely. So we'll break down